Need link building or content? Go to fatjoe.com. On-demand marketing services for agencies and teams. Fat Joe.
Hello everyone, hope you're having a great Brighton SEO so far. I'm really excited to speak to you today about how to improve your meeting productivity and how to create an action-oriented meeting agenda. So a little about me before we begin. I have had an interesting entrance into the SEO world, as we all have. I actually started out sales side before I moved in agency side and then in-house where I currently sit at MVF Global. With that, all those experiences came a lot of meetings, and I've had my fair share of good meetings and my lion's share of bad meetings. So let me tell you a story of one of my worst meetings. And yes, very random picture, I know, but let me just set the context. This, for me, resembles something out the Wild West, this experience, and sure, we all have our own versions of it. But one day, I got this calendar invite for a meeting called Website Discussions, and really broad, I know. I was like, what is this? And everyone with some kind of digital skill set was invited to the meeting, and that was a lot of people. So no one really knew why they were invited or what they're supposed to be doing there. So there was just literal silence, and you could hear the tumbleweed. It was awful. Then everyone had the same thought at the same time. I have to contribute some kind of value because I've been invited, so I've got to make myself known. And that they did. Wild West. Everyone started shooting their ideas just to try and get something out, just to showcase they did something. And it was carnage. It was so bad. And nothing came out of that, no decisive action, nothing at all, apart from just a Google Doc with a random bunch of ideas across it. I'm sure we all have had one of those before. And it was awful. I never, ever want to have that experience again, and I'm sure that you guys don't want that either. And as we all know, meetings are just not productive always, and they just can be a complete waste of time. And if you have any cool stories about your most unproductive meetings, you should definitely come and tell me after the session. I'd love to hear them. So after that, I dedicated myself to learning the art of meeting productivity, and I loved what I learned, which is why I wanted to share this all with you today. We're going to look at what the meeting productivity landscape looks like, and I've actually got some survey results that I did back in summer, where I asked digital marketers about what their meeting productivity was like, and I'm really excited to show those key sites to you today. We're also going to look at how to create an actionable meeting template, meeting agenda template, and I'll give you the template to do this, don't worry. And the final thing is some best practices and rules that you can implement in your organization today. So, without further ado, what does the meeting productivity landscape look like? Well, since 2020, so since the pandemic hit, we saw an absolute surge of people using daily users on virtual conference apps like Zoom and Google Meets. And that surge hasn't really seemed to slow down, and it seems to even be prevalent today. So the first question I wanted to ask our digital marketers is how many meetings, or has the meetings you're involved with changed since the start of the pandemic? And as you can see, majority of people said that they increased, and the data checks out. So a lot of meetings, there's been more meetings more than ever before, and with that, more attendees per meeting, interestingly. So the next question I wanted to ask, or set of questions, I wanted to understand what an average week looks like for a digital marketer in terms of meetings. So the number of meetings attended per week on average, and the amount of hours spent in meetings per week on average. So as you can see on the left, the amount of responses were around 9+ on average meetings per week. On the right, there's around 10+ hours dedicated to meeting time per week. And when you put those two responses in perspective and you put them together, that's just a lot of time dedicated to meetings, as you know. And obviously, it's around one working day and a bit more dedicated to meetings. And it's not all in one working day structure. It's usually spread across your calendar. So you've got a lot of scattered time. You don't have a lot of time for meaningful deep work because you're just always interrupted by constant calendar invites, which is never fun. Meetings everywhere. So, are additional meetings actually productive for us? That's one of the real questions. So you should definitely check out this really good resource by Zapier, but they give really alarming statistics about the meeting productivity landscape. And unproductive meetings make up for 24 billion hours wasted per year, really big, I know. And also US businesses said that they lost around 37 billion $1 billion a year due to unproductive meetings. So not only time costly, but revenue costly as well. The other statistic I pulled, which was interesting, was that 37% of workplace meetings only made use of agendas. The rest didn't. So it begs to wonder if there is actually a lot of structure going on in those meetings, and they're just scheduled just for the sake of having them, really. And looking at the news as well, as you can see, there's been a lot of terms such as meeting madness, toxic meeting culture, and meeting fatigue on the rise. And people are feeling more overwhelmed and burned out than ever before, and they're looking for solutions to remedy this. So, one of the questions I wanted to know was how productive are digital marketers finding their meetings? And mostly they put somewhat productive and average productive, which is fantastic to see, but very little said their meetings are actually extremely productive. So we're SEOs, and we know how to optimize a website, but why aren't we optimizing our meeting time better? That's something that we can look at doing. And the next question is, what would be the top priority to help make meetings more productive as well? So this is a word cloud of all the responses I received, and really happily see that everybody overwhelmingly put that an agenda would help them, would be their top priority. And other action words such as time, clear, communication, attendees were frequently responded as well. So people really are craving more structure in our world on making their meetings better. But how often are people using an agenda in their meetings? I'm very happy for the people that always did. Well done to you, 29%. But the people that occasionally and rarely did makes me wonder, do people find agendas a valuable addition to their meetings? Likely not as much. So now onto the fun part. We're going to make that agenda a valuable addition. So we're going to look at how to create the meeting agenda. But for backtrack a second, you've already heard me say the term so much you might not know what it is. So little overview of what it is first. What is a meeting agenda? It was a document that consists of a list of topics and action items that you're looking to discuss during a meeting. And it looks like this on the right, which is the template that you'll all grab after the presentation. Wait for that. But it comprises of key details, topics, action items, and a conclusion. And usually you start from the top all the way down. So agendas are helping transform the way that we approach meetings because they're creating purpose as we have an objective that we need to achieve. Structure-wise, all of the topics are predefined and linked back to that meeting objective, so it's very important and all relevant. They enhance collaboration between teams, and they also make sure that everybody that's invited is a necessary participant and they can all contribute, which is why inclusivity is baked into that. So now you've got an overview. We're going to look at how we create that agenda. So select your cloud-based note-taking app, your favorite one, could be Google Docs, OneNote, Notion, whatever you like, because this is helpful for everybody to be able to edit and access and have a single source of truth for these documents. So start there. You're going to start with the key details, the most important information, and this is going to be at the top of your agenda. They belong there, so everybody can review it and they know exactly where to find it. So you'll have your meeting title, the title of the meeting, your attendees, who's invited, you'll have your date, your time, your resources, which are also the context-relevant resources related to your meeting objective, and your meeting preparation. Now, you might be wondering why there's some words in pink, and yes, I did format that correctly, but we're going to dive into that a little bit more, because they need a bit more context to get it right. So, how does one determine an objective? Well, a meeting objective is a simple statement that defines the desired outcome of a meeting. This is so important because people are going to read your meeting objective and decide if your meeting is worth visiting because it showcases exactly what's discussed. So they help you structure your agenda too, because in a moment you'll see that topics all related back to it. So objective types typically include planning, decision-making, problem-solving, and ideation objectives. To show the case what those examples look like, here are a few on the board. And let's dive into what a decision-making one looks like. So for example, decide on if we need to scale up the hiring initiative set forth at the start of this year. So as I said, simple sentence, very short, doesn't need to be very long, but note the bold action word at the very front, decide on. Already, people get the context that there's a decision to be made in this meeting and it's not going to be that the meeting completes without making it, if that makes sense. So it gives a little bit more action and it helps people to actually go towards the objective that you want to complete. If it was something like discuss if, it might be that the meeting ends and you never make that decision. So it's really important that you bake those into your objectives. Ideation, another example, brainstorm campaign ideas for X subcategory. You know that this meeting instantly is going to be an ideating session. There's going to be a lot of ideas discussed, and that's the kind of collaboration it's going to be. You just get a lot of context that way, and it's really helpful. So if you want to create meeting objectives that are really actionable, definitely have a look at the SMART principle to create them. So, moving on to preparation. The next part of my survey is I wanted to understand how long people took to prepare for a single meeting on average. So as you can see, 1 minute to 30 minutes was the frequent response there. I'm going to assume that people were doing something in between because 1 minute is quite quick. But it's good to see that people were preparing for their meetings because it's so important. People need to be able to review, they need to be able to contribute beforehand, they need to be able to read the linked materials and get better alignment about what the hell your meeting's about. So it can also encourage people to ask questions ahead of time. So instead of people saving all their questions for the meeting and having bottlenecks on their tasks, they can ask those questions over message before having reviewed the agenda, and they can move forward with their task, making it instantly more impactful. So allocate time for prep. You can just schedule 30 minutes at the end of your day, make it a habit. It might take a bit of getting used to, but just so you can review everything you need, and you can ask your team to do the same thing, because it will be really helpful as you all come to your meeting super ready. So how does one qualify an attendee, and how does one know when someone needs to be invited? You can use this attendee qualification criteria. So an attendee must be one of 4 things. They either must be a key decision maker for the items in the agenda, have the information needed to move forward in a matter, the objective is related to a mutual issue, or they can help with implementing your decisions. So that generally qualifies someone to come to your meeting. However, you shouldn't just invite people for visibility, because we all have seen the silent participant in the room, and it's just not helpful for them, for you, it's awkward, so don't do that. And avoid duplication, so don't have too many chefs in the same kitchen. So ideally, you should just have one role and not multiple, as it's much more impactful that way, and more discussion can be had. So, moving on to the topics, the meaty part of the agenda. These are specific items related back to that meeting objective, which you're going to spend a lot of time discussing with your team during the meeting. They enable focused and collaborative discussion. So topics are added in before the meeting, usually by the person who's organized it, and basically they can fall under 2 types. So they could be informational topics, where information is just being reviewed, announced, just a quick update just to get some context. They can be more discussion-based. So basically, an example there, I've discussed top priority tasks this week, and a little example of how you can ask people to add prep before their meetings, they add their tasks in beforehand. That's going to constitute more of a discussion. There's going to be a lot more time spent on that. So it's really helpful to be able to just give that context in the meeting topic there. So those are 2 types of topics that they can be. Also, topics are used for note-taking during the meeting, which is incredibly important. And like I said, you can capture any important notes before and after. So that's before the meeting, and then that's after the meeting. Doesn't have to be a lot of notes, by the way. You do not have to inundate your document with tons and tons of notes, because you just want to have the key points there that were reviewed that actually matter. So just only note the following: decisions, outcomes, and action items, but don't note anything that's like conversation, a debate, a doc summary, because that just isn't helpful for anybody and it adds a lot more noise than necessary. So avoid doing that, and think about it if you were reviewing this document. What would you like to see? Do you want to see someone's discussion with someone on some topic? Not really. You just want to know what happened and what the decisions and everything important was. The other thing to do, which I probably should have put this in before, but when you're structuring your agenda topics, be careful with being really broad in the way that you name them. So for example, metrics review isn't maybe the best agenda topic title, because it can open the door to your meeting getting a little bit off tangent because nobody really knows what it is you want to talk about specifically. And that can just eat up a lot of time and, well, be really costly, as we saw by the statistics. So what you want to do is you want to make your topics as focused as possible, hyper-focused back to that objective. So I'm going to give you an example of what my favorite topic used to be, of upcoming tasks. I just rattle off my list of all of the tasks I had that week, and because there were so many of them, I'll just be rushing to finish it, and I would get no discussion around it. It was just eating everyone's time, like no one really cared at the end of it. It wasn't really helpful, was it? So when it's actually defined as discuss the top 3 priority tasks for the upcoming week, instantly I already know I should talk about the more impactful things, the things that are actually going to drive the needle and matter to in-house and clients, everything in between. Because from that, if I have any bottlenecks, if anything is preventing me from completing it, if I need any information, people will just be able to hop on and we can have a meaningful discussion about that. So that's an example of how you can make your topics even more focused than before. So you can have a look at the slide and review how that's structurally set up. To level up your topics, you can do a few things. If you feel like people are overspending time in a particular area, you can just appoint minutes to help it stay on track. So for example, review September KPIs. might just be a 5-minute chat. You don't need to go 15 minutes deep into this. So you can just put 5 minutes and set that expectation at the very beginning. The next thing you can do, if you want people to contribute during the meeting and you want them to speak up, you can tag them to a topic like so they can own it and discuss it during a meeting. And it's a really nice way to enhance natural collaboration and people are just more willing to talk during a meeting instead of you asking people things all the time. The next thing is action items. And these are really important because they're tasks that people need to complete outside of the meeting. And these are only added in during the meeting, by the way. So this is a structure, before we go into an example, of what an action item could look like. So for example, task owner will complete specific task by deadline with a checkbox. So instantly, the completion checkbox knows when it's crossed out, it's done, so that conveys completion already. Task owner, people know exactly who owns it. Specific task, the task itself. Deadline, the expectation of when it needs to be completed by. So we're going to give an example, but Leah found out that she lost GSC access during a meeting and she needed it to be able to complete her task. So Luke needs to grant Leah her GSC property access to her GSC property straight after the meeting. Shrek also needs to complete his page quality review and send it to Fiona by end of day. Yes, I know, sorry, it's really nerdy, but I found it really fun when I created those. But those are examples, those examples of how you can formulate meaningful action points, and they do not have to be really complex. Yeah. Now, for the conclusion and the wrap-up. So always allocate time at the end for any questions so that people can get the time they need to get more clarity and just clear up anything they're unsure about. You'll be surprised at how much more it helps people get aligned, and you might be able to complete your meeting objective a lot better. So always just have a little open floor at the end. It's a really good habit and helps people. So you can grab the template here, this bit.ly link, which I'll tweet afterwards and add on my LinkedIn, so look out for that to have a place to start with your agendas. Before we end, the final section is about setting best meeting rules and practices for you to be able to enhance your productivity and action even more during your meetings. So, in the survey, back to the survey, this was a question I asked if people have experienced the following issues during their meetings. And some of these have already been talked about during the agenda or cleared up by that, but I wanted to make sure that we convey this in this section, so stay tuned. But firstly, who creates that agenda? Well, it's usually always the meeting organizer. It's their responsibility to create, distribute, and structure that agenda before any meeting and send it to you in advance. And the attendee's responsibility is to review and add to the agenda topics beforehand and complete any assigned prep. And like I said, that organizer needs to send the meeting in advance. And please try and send it 24 hours in advance so that people have enough time to be able to bake it into their day to have a look at what you need. Because that 1-minute rush before the meeting is just not helpful for anyone. A few ways that you can help people even more is by adding your agenda, your objective, and the required prep into the calendar invite description. Because the calendar invite is usually the single source of truth where people accept their meetings. So just adding that information is already helpful for them to be able to discover what the meeting's about and what the assigned prep is and if it's worth attending the meeting. So also the other thing was that people were struggling to assign note takers during their meeting. At the start, just ask the floor if anybody's happy to volunteer. You'll be surprised that someone might be happy just to put up their hand and they're happy to do it. The second thing you can do is implement a round-robin system. So you can ask for a new note taker per topic and distribute the responsibility around the room. The third thing you can do, more of a recurring meeting setting, but if you ask a different team member to run the agenda every meeting. So it gives them an understanding of how to lead a meeting and be able to prepare an agenda, which is great practice. If you find that people are finding it difficult to understand notes, a little hack you can do is the organizer can share their screen, so agenda notes are being captured in real time. So any feedback can be offered on language. If people are finding it difficult to understand something and interpret, it can be tweaked then and there. So it's a good way to elicit some feedback that way. As we all know, sometimes a meeting just isn't the right format to collaborate, and meetings should have been emails. But there are different types of collaboration. So on the left, we've got more two-way collaboration types. These are more discussion-based. And then on the right, we've got more one-way information collaboration types. So how do we know what constitutes a meeting and what constitutes a different format, such as an email? Well, I've done the work for you. I've split that list into two, very convenient. But on the left, there's a lot more context and information and a lot more complexity that might require that is worth a meeting. But on the right, if you're just sharing an information or gathering answers or just giving an update, that is much better formatted to be an email or a message and save time and just not having unnecessary meetings where people are just staring blankly and listening to you. That's much better being in those formats. So people just often accept your meeting and they don't really challenge why, they just accept it because it's in their calendar. So the next step that you can do is empower your attendees to cancel the invite if they feel like they don't see any value of that meeting. Ooh, bit of a controversial opinion. How do you say no to a meeting? Well, the first thing you can ask yourself or ask your team to do is ask if there's an agenda so they can get context on the objective and topics beforehand. Then they can ask, do I add value by even attending? Do I see the value in this? Can I add value? 3, am I the right person to attend this meeting, or is there somebody better suited? And then 4, if I declined, what else could I use this time for, which is important when there's high priority tasks at stake. Right, this is a really random slide. Elon has very interesting views on meeting culture, and interesting views in general, but good ones here. He says you should walk out of a meeting as soon as it's obvious that you're not adding any value. The next thing he says, it is not rude to leave. It is rude to make someone stay and waste their time. I think it's a very good approach that we should all take and being more empowered to cancel our meetings. So in this case, you should listen to Elon. And then the final resort that you can do is you can send this wonderful picture across. But please, please, please send them the context as to why you're not attending that meeting. It's probably going to ruffle a few feathers if you don't. Almost at the end, the late meeting starts. If people are turning up 7 minutes after you've scheduled the meeting, really annoying, happens all the time. In the future meetings, just start on time as scheduled. They'll soon realize that you're actually serious and turn up on time. So move their topics to the bottom of the agenda so they can pick them up, and they'll make an effort to come to your meeting. They agreed to it in the end of the day, so yeah, spicy. Encouraging more participation from your attendees. And if you feel like people are not contributing as much, you can do these 3 things. Firstly, ask for input from everyone, so you can make it an effort to go around and make it your normal habit to do that and make that the expectation. Secondly, you can call on the low contributors specifically. You can ask them to contribute, because if somebody's over-contributing, that might mean that there's less confidence around the room. So that's just a good way to be able to see that. The third way is to ask everyone to add ask everyone to add to the agenda and own their own topic. As mentioned previously, just tag them in there so they can own their own topic, and it's a nice way to naturally enhance contribution. Finally, adaptive feedback, because you should have fun with the way that you set your best meeting practices and make it as easy as possible for your team and the way it works for them. So the examples I talked about today are just general, but you can find your own way to carve out your own practices. So after this session, I hope you don't have another meeting about meetings, and you don't have any more Wild West situations like I did, but you end your meeting madness once and for all. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of Brighton SEO.
Need link building or content? Go to fatjoe.com. On-demand marketing services for agencies and teams. Fat Joe.